Man's response to his inner instinctive voice has caused him to start on the greatest adventure of his career, the discovery of mind. Man's first discovery of his ability to think was set aside as being too evident to take any notice of. He could think, but what of it? Of course, it was proof that he was, but that was all. He had always been able to think. This simply gave him the ability to know his needs and try to supply them. This he had always done. The ability to think seemed to be an automatic thing. It came with him and would doubtless die when he died. The brain seemed to be the organ of thought, and of course, when death stilled the brain, it would no longer operate. This was self-evident. But the day came when some wise man said that it is not the brain that thinks at all, for if the brain, of itself, could think, then one can cut it out and it would keep right on thinking. No. The brain of itself could not think, and yet, without a brain, man could not think, which simply means that man needs a brain while here, but that the brain of itself does not think. The brain does not think, and yet man thinks, so behind the brain there must be a thinker. But where is this thinker? We do not see him. We have a right to say that there is a thinker when no one has ever seen him. Yes, for can we name a single force of nature that we can see? Have we ever seen electricity or any of the other forces of nature? No. And the only evidence we have of their existence is that we see what they do. We have light and motive power, so we have a right to suppose that there is a force which we call electricity. This is true all along the line, for we see effect and not causes. But to return to the thinker, we do not see him, but the proof of his reality is in the evidence of his works. We know that the legs do not walk, for if severed from the body, they could not carry anyone very far. Cut off the hand and see if it could still hold anything in its grasp. Pluck out the eye and it cannot see. And so it is with all the organs of the body. There is a thinker and a doer back of the organism who is using it for a conscious purpose. The body is unconscious without the thinker. And this is a great discovery, for it means that the body without the thinker could neither be sick nor suffer. For without the thinker there could be no movement of body. Why then are we sick? This injury will not be answered until every form of disease is swept from the face of the earth and numbered with the things that were once thought necessary. For man has discovered that the body, of itself, has no life nor power to act. Let us follow the course of man's thought since he first made this discovery about the body and began to apply his knowledge. He first realized that instinctive man built up the body through evolution. And after having created and evolved a perfect body, left it in man's keeping to do with as he willed. At first, man was ignorant of this, thinking that the body was self-operating. But as soon as he discovered that such was not the case, he began to formulate certain new theories about himself. He discovered that while he could consciously think and decide, something had to happen to his thoughts after he had thought them. They went somewhere, for soon they would come back as remembrance. Man had now discovered that he could consciously think and that his thought would come back to him again. This led to the conclusion that memory is an active thing, an inner mental action. He said, "Memory is the storehouse of all my conscious thoughts, and it is active. My body is not conscious of life, but my thought is conscious of my body. My body is operated on upon my thought, and it must also be operated on upon by my memory, since memory is active. But since memory is only the result of conscious thought, memory, of itself, is an unconscious operation of what was once a conscious thought. Since man has had the habit of naming things, he named his memory his unconscious thought, and his conscious thought he called the objective mind. He now came to the conclusion that he had two minds, one conscious and one unconscious, or subconscious. Conscious mind being the one that he used all of the time in his self-conscious state, and the subconscious mind being the storehouse of all his conscious thoughts, as well as the seat of his memory. It follows that as the conscious thought acts, unconscious thoughts must also operate. This conclusion leads to the discovery that the subconscious mind is the builder of the body, not that it really made the body in the first place, for instinctive man did that. but that the subconscious mind keeps the body going and is always acting on the thoughts of the conscious mind. After carefully watching this process, man discovered that he could consciously think, and by so doing, make such an impression on his unconscious thought that it would do what he directed. From these observations, he deduced the law of suggestion to be one of action and reaction. Thus he found how habits are formed, that they are conscious ideas fallen into the inner thought and carried out to logical conclusions. Therefore he began to reason. Instinctive man within me is perfect, and yet I appear to be imperfect. My apparent imperfections must be the result of an imperfect thinking. In reality, I am, and always have been, perfect. I would now begin to think differently about myself and see what happens. And as he began to think from the new basis, he found that the body responded and was healed. So he came to this conclusion: God made me perfect, but he also made me an individual, which means that I can do with myself as I will. I cannot really destroy my body, but I can make it most uncomfortable. Since God made me and made me perfect, each one of the organs of my body represents a perfect idea. Realizing this to be true, he began to think from this basis, and the organs of the body responded. He found that the thoughts of peace produced a peaceful condition, while thoughts of fear produced a disturbed condition. That confidence made him strong, while fear made him weak. In fact, he was able to trace each mental attitude to its physical correspondent. He discovered that asleep or awake, the inner minds work all the time. He also found that by analyzing his thought, he could discover what ailed him. This he called psychoanalysis. Then another idea came to him. The whole thing was in accordance with the law. He had discovered a law of mind just as he, at another time, discovered a law of electricity. If it were law, then he could always use it, and it would always respond. From this, he gradually built up a definite technique for the practice of right thinking. He found that if he always thought of himself as being perfect, he would always feel better. But what should he do with his body when it appeared sick? How was he to think of himself when he was sick? Could he deny that he was sick when he was suffering? Yes, for his sickness was the result of thought, and by changing the thought he could change the effect. He learned to turn away from the body when it was sick and go back into mind and think of the body as being perfect, for his thought worked independently of the body. He turned from the image of sickness to the idea of health and said, I am perfect, no matter what the appearance may be. But some kinds of sickness had never entered his mind at all. This is, he had never consciously thought of them. How was he to reconcile the fact with his new theory? For a while this was a hard problem to solve, but by a still more careful study of his inner self, he discovered that what he called his subjective mind took all of his thoughts and did something with them. He found that they were a certain combination of thought which, brought to their logical conclusions, would produce certain kinds of diseases. He did not have to consciously think of a certain disease to have it, but if he thought of certain kinds of thoughts that would produce their logical results, for instance, if he were excited all the time, it would produce nervousness. If he became angry, it would secrete poison in his system, and so on through the whole category of human ailments. Somewhere in the mind, they had their reason for being. Perhaps he could not always tell exactly where, but by knowing that his body was perfect, he could still heal himself. He knew that as time went on and his knowledge grew, he would find out more and more about himself, and so be better able to heal himself. He was glad that he had started on the right track. He believed that he would know all in time and never be sick again. Then a new discovery came, which is that he could think of others and heal them. It seemed to make no difference where they were. He could think of them and heal them. This was a most astounding fact, for it meant that there was a common mind somewhere through which his thought operated. For he could not reach another unless there was a medium between himself and the other person. This seemed strange, for what he had learned to think of as an individual's subjective mind was, after all, only the personal use that he was making of something which is around everyone. He began to think of others, and found that the mind responded to his thinking for them and caused some action to take place in their bodies. He called this medium universal mind, or the law of God. It seemed to be as omnipresent as the law of electricity or any of the other forces of nature. In this way, he discovered how it was possible that the whole race might have held certain kinds of thoughts and how they might have operated through anyone who was receptive to them. That is, if anyone should feel discouraged, other thoughts of discouragement might gain entrance also and make him feel worse. This he called race suggestion. But how was he to protect himself from it? By knowing that it could not operate through him, that he was a perfect idea and could not be affected by suggestion, for, after all, it was nothing but thought, he learned to build a mental wall around himself, which could not be entered unless he chose. This he called divine protection. Man had now discovered that he could help and heal himself and others by thinking into the same kind of a universal law of mind. He found that, like all other forces of nature, it was a great impersonal law and could be consciously used whenever he wished to use it, and that the use of it was through right thinking. He realized that the time must come when the race would be healed by knowing the truth about itself. But, because the law was mental, it could only work for those who believed in it, and since many did not believe, the thing to do was to heal himself, and others who wished to be healed, waiting for the rest of the world to realize the fact. But another thought came to him. If he could think into some kind of universal medium of mind and heal himself and others, if this mind could produce such a physical effect on the body, why could it not also produce the same kind of an effect on conditions and the affair of life? Why was it that some were rich and some were poor? Was this fate, or was it because there was not enough for all? If the one mind made bodies, why did it not also create conditions? And if it did, why did it not give to all alike? Why were some people happy and prosperous and others unhappy, weak, and poor? Could the answer to this also be in the mind? Could it be that just as man had thought of himself as sick, and so made sickness, he had thought of poverty and made this condition possible in his experience? Questions like these and many others came into the mind of man and caused him to search even more deeply into the nature of things. Looking about, he saw some succeed and some fail, though all was taking place in the same world and under common conditions. So he knew that it must be something in man, and not outside of him, that made all of these things possible. He realized that conditions did not make themselves. Everything in man's life was run by himself. In this way, man realized that even his affairs were controlled by thought working through the avenue of the one mind. He discovered that by changing his thought, he could remold his affairs, and that by right thinking, he could bring into his life new conditions. But would there be enough to go around should everyone become prosperous? Yes, for instinctive life is limitless. So man discovered that he could control his affairs by right thinking. He could bring into his experience the things he wished to enjoy if he thought correctly, and since this was all in accordance with the law, he could do so consciously. He realized that the time would come when everyone would think correctly, and poverty, unhappiness, and all that goes with them would be swept from the face of the earth. They were never intended to be, but man had misused his power. Now that he understood, he would change his whole manner of thinking, and consequently he would become happy and have plenty. But everyone did not believe this. Many said that it was a foolish idea, while others said that it was too good to be true. However, it was soon proven that whoever would believe and comply with the law could prove it to be true. If some did not wish to believe, that was all right. There was plenty who would, and the direct proofs of their lives would in time convince others. In this way, eventually, all would be saved from the unbearable conditions. The thing to do is to teach the law to those who do believe. The race is made up of individuals, and the place to begin is with the person who believes in the greater possibility. Each one, for himself, must work out the law of his own being. It is within the power of every man to completely change his environment and completely heal his body. Whether or not he will do this depends entirely upon his own conviction and his own determination. Nature attends him on the way and is always ready to serve, but he is an individual and nothing will ever be forced upon him. Let anyone follow the law, comply with its nature, and constantly apply himself to right thinking and living, and he will prove to himself that life holds all and more than he has ever imagined.